Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
Every part of comics and artwork is a form of communication with other people. It's not just a, here, let me direct my thoughts at you as a dictation of concept, but it's hoping to convince you of how cool you think a visual could be or a story could be. And you're trying to communicate ideas in one part storytelling and greater part just graphic impact. You're hoping to relate a sense of energy, urgency, and enthusiasm to people. That there's a lightning of spirit that comes out of superheroes that has always worked for me. That it isn't really about the practicality of what they might do, it's not the practicality about grown men punching each other in costumes. It really isn't about that. It's a visual metaphor. And that metaphor could be for a lot of things, but it's mostly just about the energy and enthusiasm that can be found in the fun of life.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. Time again for Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Happy to welcome Stewart Kenneth Moore to Word Balloon. It's a pleasure to meet you, Stewart. Thanks for coming on today.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Stewart, did you paint what's behind you right there?
Yeah, that's one of mine. Yeah, right there.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Just happen to have it lying around.
That's outstanding. Here, I'm going to zoom in again. Look at those. Unbelievable, man. I am truly blown away by your various ways that you draw. And primarily, we're here to talk about this. And this is MK Ultra, Sex, Drugs, and the CIA. It's a new book from Clover Press. And you can see some of the pull quotes that are there. But this is amazing. This is an exploration of the CIA's use of LSD over the years and kind of a notorious history. As you say at the beginning of your book, that it's kind of a true story, but really it's kind of based on factual other stories. And I mean, you obviously take a bit of a license, but you really are talking about the tactics that the CIA used.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The irony of the story is that the most outrageous things in the story are the things that happened, and we play with it and we have a fiction, but most of what the more egregious things that you see did take place. We've changed a few things. There's a few names been changed, but because there were real victims, and it's another thing that's slightly odd about it is that it's one of the most outrageous attempts at illegal, sort of invasive behavior, and it involved all sorts of unusual technologies, new technologies, including operating inside of the brain with machinery and so forth. They had an animal, the acoustic kitty, a cat that they put a machine inside its brain. This is back in the 60s when they really weren't very good at this kind of thing. And so there's a lot of really weird technology went into it. And yet you don't really hear much about it. People don't talk about it. It's not one of the big conspiracy theories that people talk about, probably because it's not a theory. It really did happen. But it's very strange.
Yeah, comparing it to like Operation Paperclip, what the Nazis were doing with people in during World War II. Of course, those are horrific stories as well. But you're right. I mean, the Americans and the CIA, they kind of get a pass because it's kind of this unknown history. And if people they freak out.
Yeah, for some reason, there's a lot of that going on. So, for example, with Operation Paperclip, we think of that in terms of NASA and the development of the space race. But really, Paperclip operated on a lot of different levels. And one of the worst people that they brought in was a death camp doctor, an underling of Joseph Mengele, the Angel of Death, who, basically just tortured children in the camps. Well, this guy came into America, worked on MK Ultra. It was about mind control, and he had learned things in the camps from operating on people, and so he was involved in that project. And his name was Dr. Kurt Plotner. And in the 60s, he retired from CIA and he went back to Germany, and he lived his life out in Freiburg. He took a professorship at the University of Freiburg and was never prosecuted. And I don't know why. I mean, after he left the CIA, I would have thought someone like Simon Wiesenthal would have been all over him, but that never happened. So he was protected, I think, even in his old age.
But he worked here. And
he worked in the States.
CIA.
He worked in the States,
it's, I mean, we see it in films like, and it's kind of cavalierly explained, like in The Right Stuff.
Yeah.
And, our Germans are better than
your Germans
and everything. And it's kind of true. I mean, once, in the closing days of the war, both Russia and the Americans freed a lot of scientists.
Yeah.
And so I would imagine the reason why they didn't go after him is because he, worked for us.
Yeah.
And probably got a pass. I mean, Werner von Braun, depending on who you talk to, is a hero or a villain. And, was he had no choice working for Hitler on the V2 rockets, or was he complacent? I mean, we kind of don't know. And I mean, he stayed here and lived in Huntsville, Alabama till his dying days. And, was like a flag waving, very proud, converted American.
Yeah.
But it's like, but what about the other stuff you did, man?
Right. So take von Braun, for example. He's a rocket engineer. And of course, those rockets rained down on London and other cities in Britain, all over Britain. But, you can kind of give him a pass because he's working in munitions. But when you're actually a card-carrying Nazi, an SS officer and a doctor, and you operated on children, and you're still being protected, that's an order of magnitude worse than what someone who like von Braun, who himself is a villain because his rocket operations were being he was working with slave labor people from the camps. Were helping develop. We're working on the material for his rocket programs. So he's a villain, but it's a whole different thing than actually operating on kids in the camps. And so this guy got away with it. So I went looking for him, couldn't find his picture anywhere, and he had to be in the story because he's part of the story. So having not been able to find his photograph, I turned him into a skeleton.
Yes.
I illustrate him as a somewhat camp skeleton.
Yes. There he is. Yeah. Amazing.
So.
Yes. Jesus.
Yeah, and because he was the Angel of Death's assistant, so that's death.
Sure. That's 100%. Well, again, Stewart, what I really appreciate, and it absolutely fits the nature of the story, like right there. Beautiful painterly images and things. And I've got a couple panels
Thank you.
that I pulled from the book. And truly, man, I mean, you do all these different styles of art. Good Lord. And then here's a more traditional page.
Yeah.
And shame on me. I didn't grab some of the more psychedelic ones.
No, that's okay.
Did you color everything yourself?
Yeah, I did everything. I did everything. So I even did the lettering. So for my sins, I'm sure there's going to be letterers out there complaining, but that's another learning curve. I did the whole thing, and so you try and explain that to people. They don't, if they're not in the industry, they don't realize just how much time that is. So they think you just.
How long did it take, man? I mean, this is like around 140 pages, top to bottom, cover to cover.
That's right, but there's 2 books, so it's 262 pages. So
we're gonna get a second volume.
Yeah, second volume comes out, I think, in July.
Hey, great! Well, there's an excuse for us to talk
meet at the con. Yeah,
absolutely,
that's the whole.
Man.
Yeah,
well, that's great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, man.
Well,
this is a rich, truly a rich subject, and I mean, it's your style for the story It's part underground comic.
Yeah,
It's part traditional comic. You just experiment all over the place,
yeah.
and that's amazing. And truly, your talent shows. I mean, it's
Thank you.
so well put together, and really the images fit the moments. So I'm truly blown away at
Thank
how
you.
great this is, both from a narrative standpoint and an artistic standpoint.
Well, thank you very much. The story itself was written as a screenplay for a film, and the gents who wrote this are two friends of mine from the States who wrote this as a screenplay back in about 2001. Brandon Beckner and Scott Sampilla, and then we were just hanging out, and they couldn't get the script picked up. And they showed the script to me, and I was saying, wow, this has got so much potential for pyrotechnic hallucinogenic effects that you need a huge budget to do this properly. And then you realize, well, that's comic books. We have there's no sky's the limit. And,
Absolutely, man.
and if it's Superman, then the sky's not the limit. It's the sun, the space, whatever. So but yeah, so that was their baby as a screenplay. But so we started working on it as a potential graphic novel, and it was slow going at first, getting it started, because I decided I'd really try and set a high bar, because I figured if I got 20-30 pages that were really high bar, then it'd be okay. We'd end up with a publisher, but that didn't happen. And so I had to start taking gigs and various things, and time passed, and it became a labor of love, or always was, but it became this kind of passion project. And but it's done now, and it's done thanks to Clover. So
that's great. Yeah, how did you guys hook up with Clover Press?
So there's a bunch of stepping stones here. First of all, I did a bunch of zines and comics press stuff, and but that never really went anywhere. And then I did an adaptation of Thrawn Janet, which is the my favorite ghost story by Robert Louis Stevenson, and set in Scotland. And David Lloyd published it in Aces Weekly. So David is the artist behind V for Vendetta and many other things, but he set up this wonderful digital platform, Aces Weekly, and so he published Thrawn Janet, and then about maybe 6 months after that, I heard that Pat Mills was looking for an artist for Defoe, and I pointed out the Thrawn Janet stuff, and he really liked it, because the Thrawn Janet style was deliberately pushing towards this sort of 60s or 50s style comics, horror comics.
Yes, EC comics and the like.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. And yeah, exactly. And with a heavy dose of Hammer House of Horror type artwork. And Pat liked it enough to go to bat for me, I guess, and showed it to Matt Smith at 2000 AD, and Matt gave me some test pages to do. So long story short, I did Defoe, which you just flashed up on the screen.
Yes.
I think that was the page. Yeah, that's the page where the Dutch Prime Minister gets eaten. So Defoe's a 17th century zombie story. But it's a brilliant concept Pat came up with. And the Great Fire of London is kicked off by a meteor or a comet, but it's carrying a pathogen that reanimates the dead. And so it's a great opportunity to show England, London, at a time when there was this burgeoning new thing, science. They had these natural philosophers who were becoming the first proper scientists. And there was a lot of great literature emerging and art, and it was a really wonderful era. And so Pat gets to play with all that stuff and the turmoil of it, the political turmoil. And where was I going with my train of thought there? Oh yeah, so for example being that the Dutch Prime Minister, he really was eaten in real life. Pat tends to fold things in that are like, real history. And I don't know if you know this, John, but he established 2000 AD back in the day. It was Pat's baby, 2000 AD. And
I do know that. I've been.
Of course, you spoke to Pat, so you
know.
Well,
and we were talking about this off the air, but I will even go further and say, I'm so glad that Pat is writing his memoirs.
Oh yeah, they're very funny.
They're funny as hell. Yeah. And in fact, I am just getting started with everything about his character Slain. And truly, it's truly, man, as an American, comics are international, and I am still such a novice in terms of exploring the globe as far
Yeah,
as great comics. And truly, the 2000 AD story is so vastly different from the history of DC and the history of Marvel,
yeah,
and that's why, thank God, Pat's there. It's fine. It's one man's point of view. That's okay. He was
yeah.
there at the beginning. He knows all the guys, and he's not afraid to throw punches, and it's fascinating as hell. And I love that he's doing his science fiction anthology himself,
Yeah,
Space Warp.
yeah. It's very
Uh,
cool.
do you have anything in Space Warp?
No, no, nothing to do with it. But glad to see it thriving. And the point of that is, well, I don't know how much you know this, but artists, writers tend to get screwed.
I did.
They do.
Sadly, I'm aware of that. It's
Yeah.
horrible. Go
In
on.
the art world, it's mostly artists, but in the comics world, the writers get screwed as well.
Yes.
So anyway, Pat's established this thing in order to make sure everybody gets a fair whack, and I don't see anything wrong with that. I don't see why anyone would see anything wrong with that, and I don't see why any publisher would see anything wrong with that.
Absolutely.
So I don't understand. I really don't understand what's going on with publishing. That they're just being very meager, but and it's gonna have to change.
Well, the good news is people like Pat, people like David with Aces Weekly,
Oh yeah,
they can kind of create their own thing and
Yeah.
bring their audience to these new platforms. And I mean, it's really and finally, much smarter businessman than me explained it as the decentralization of media, of everything, truly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you can certainly see that in media, certainly in comics. I see it in broadcasting, and that's why I podcast. And it's amazing, and it really
Yeah.
is like creative people can make something and don't need to go to a publisher, don't need to go to a big broadcast company, and
That's right.
just put it out there and gather their audience if they're patient.
That's right. And it's funny, everybody's trying to get everything for free, it seems to me right now. I keep seeing, technology companies saying, send us your ideas. And if it's a good one, we'll help you develop it. There's no protection for the person who would send in that idea.
No.
And the other day I did an illustration of a puddle of blood, and it was the face of Vladimir Putin. And so I thought, I don't do any, editorial cartoons or anything now, and so I don't have any contacts. So I just thought, well, maybe I'll send this to a few journalist pals of mine, see what they say. And one guy came back and said, there's this thing happening over. I wouldn't name the company, but they're doing something. So I looked at the document they were sending around, aggregating art for use with regard to Ukraine, and I just read down the article a wee bit, and it just said, and kind of buried a wee bit, just said, something like, nobody gets paid for that. I mean, nobody's going to get paid for it. So you think, well, maybe it's for a good cause, but are they going to donate money? Is this company going to donate money for a good cause? Or are they just going to aggregate art from the internet? Just say, here, hand it to us and we'll put it on our platform. Get lost. Why would
Absolutely,
I do that?
man.
I've got a platform, which is the internet. I mean, I'm already there. So I don't have their scope or whatever, but I'm on the internet,
I don't know what the newspaper situation is in Europe compared to here in the States, but I mean, it really is like a dying medium, newspapers.
Yeah.
And everyone that is in the know is wondering what is going to happen to all this amazing editorial cartooning that, good Lord, goes back to the 1800s for credit. Well, hell, even early, shame on me. Hundreds of years before that. Hundreds of years before that.
Yeah, but you're right. But even the newspapers have always carried some images by artists, and it does help to illustrate the stories. And I don't understand the meager mindedness of it all. I mean, I do get that in the 90s and in the late 80s they started getting this clip art thing happening. So you get all the clip art, and then you don't need any artists because this stuff's all practically free. But then photography, printing processes became more. It got easier to print quality photography in the newspapers and color photography. So I can see that it gets edged out that way. But when you get to the point where it's like, send us your illustrations, and if we like it, we'll use it for free. It's like, what? No. So anyway, back to that thing I was saying about the prime minister getting eaten.
Yes, in the photo. Yes.
That really happened. That actually, he wasn't
Sorry.
technically the prime minister, but he was in a similar position prior to there being such a thing as a prime minister, and he was eaten. And his name was DeWitt. And the myth about him, or the story about him, was that he was eaten. And so Pat turned it into a zombie situation. So that's a perfect example of how he would marry up. You know, how he marries up a little bit of history with a little bit of fact, a little bit of fun. You know, fiction. So, and the same with Slain. The interesting thing about Slain was that he had kept seeing, you know, like in America, you've got this, in Marvel comics, you've got Thor and all these characters like this. And this is a Greek, this is Norwegian saga basis. But Pat's idea was, well, why are we doing that? Why are we looking at the Greeks and the Norwegians, and why don't we look at our own background? And sure enough, there's this incredibly rich background in Irish literature and mythology, and this whole thing with Slain, where he goes into a warp spasm, that's in the literature. I mean, that's actually there in the old stories, and it's actually called a warp spasm. So you know, you've got a guy who's already Conan and the Hulk in one, you know. So
yes, yeah,
and that's in your backyard, and no one even had noticed it. So another great find and development on his part. So
I always try to understand as best I can a subject before I enter into an interview, and sometimes that causes a delay, and that's why Pat's book about the history of Slain and creating it does go into the real historical background as well. Yeah. And truly, I just want to like I said, I just want to absorb it and understand it, and then I'll be bugging Pat about a new comic.
Get another interview going.
And David with Aces Weekly, man, that's just been great too, because all the different diverse artists that he gathers and aggregates for the thing is terrific. And yeah, man, I mean, he saw the future years ago when it comes to digital comics.
He definitely did.
Provided an opportunity, and it's amazing what a great artist himself, and is kind of basically retired as far as drawing.
Yeah, I wonder. I keep seeing some things by him, but I don't know what he's actually really doing other than Aces. I know he's got his hands full with that, and that's a big project. So.
I asked him, and I mean, that's because even at conventions promoting Aces Weekly, he'll do a little sketch on a business card. I mean, really, really tiny. And you know, I'm like, David, we love your books, and he's like, yeah, but that's enough. And you know, and he's minding the store at Aces. I mean, that's what he wants to do, and he's like. I'm like, covers even? No, not really interested. And I'm okay.
I'm a dyed in the wool V for Vendetta fan.
Oh,
so I think my view is that if you've done V for Vendetta, you might as well just stop. You know.
Well, yeah, that and Garth Ennis's War Stories and his contributions to that over the years. I've had the pleasure of talking to Garth as well, and I mean, that's the thing. It's like, oh God, I mean, there's just a real lyric sort of beauty to how
it's just incredible.
Yeah,
I keep looking forward to seeing a fully black and white version of V for Vendetta.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, because
he is taking a lot of his creator-owned stuff and repackaging it and putting it back out there and stuff, which is terrific. Because again, thank God the rights have reverted back to him and reap the benefits. I mean, there's a hell of a library of stuff, and that's as yourself working at 2000 AD. Has it been a good experience?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, for me, it's kind of a funny experience because I wouldn't be drawing, I don't think, if it wasn't for 2000 AD. Because when I was a boy, I was reading that, and that's really, absolutely what got me really seriously drawing all the time. And so it's, to me, it's like, you know, it's bucket list stuff. Being able to do anything for 2000 AD. You know, so yeah, absolutely wonderful.
Who are some of your artistic heroes from 2000 AD?
Oh God, everybody. Mike McMahon, Brian Bolland, Ron Smith, Carlos Esquerra. You know, just the amazing Carlos Esquerra. Let me see, Ian Gibson. Just everybody. I mean, and later guys as well. I mean, I'm just a massive fan of the publication. When I was a kid, I got to a point where I thought, maybe there'll be a more adult version of 2000 AD out there. and I couldn't find it anywhere. And then I went on a holiday. I went on a sort of school trip, and on the way back from the school trip was to Hadrian's Wall. I went into a newsagent and I found Warrior, and this magazine produced by Des Skin, and it
Yes.
had some of the guys like Steve Dillon, who I'm a huge fan of Steve Dillon, and so it had Steve Dillon on the cover, I think, and or maybe it was David that was on the cover, but that's where I first saw Viva Vendetta. And,
right, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and so I read it, and I felt like with comics, it's like this. I think you feel like, well, now it's different because you see everybody on the internet. But back in the day, it was definitely like a one-on-one thing. There was very few people. I didn't know anybody else that read comics, and I read V for Vendetta, and then the magazine died, and I never saw the conclusion of the story.
Right.
And so, yes, that was it. Over. And what was crazy was I moved to Central Europe, what a lot of people call Eastern Europe. Prague, but it's Central Europe, but there was no comics here when I came here, and I was totally outside of the comics thing. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on back in the States or in the UK. And I remember walking along the street one day and I saw this V mask spray painted on the wall, and I thought, what? Because to me that was just something that I'd seen. Nobody else had seen this, because it was unique to. It was so, I would say, very few people read, Warrior or would have been aware of V for Vendetta.
Well, and the V mask is the Guy Fawkes mask, right?
Yeah, well, that's the other thing that's weird about it. This Guy Fawkes mask
in Prague.
Yeah, but David thought that there was a Guy Fawkes mask, and there isn't. Like, he thought there was a template for this. So he said to Alan Moore, "We'll do Guy Fawkes," because in his mind he was like, "There's a drawing I can base it on," but there wasn't one. The only drawings of Guy Fawkes are like these old woodcuts, and there's no real detail to go with. There's nothing significant. So he had to come up with that. So when you see that mask, you're not just seeing Guy Fawkes, you're seeing David Lloyd, because there was no Guy Fawkes mask.
God,
there was
that's
no face.
incredible.
It didn't exist.
That's amazing. So, we were talking about the culture wars, and there's been a couple. There's a group, I don't even remember what the group represents, but they walk around in the V for Vendetta masks.
Anonymous.
Stuff.
That's Anonymous, I think. They always do that, and that's Anonymous on the internet. But yeah, there's a group that marched to this as well. But it's so surreal to see that emerging. You're moving through time, 20 years, 30 years. You're not paying attention to what you read when you were a young teenager, and then you see this face that you think only you know. And then so yeah, now there's a bar in Prague, and it's all dedicated to that. Everybody wears the mask. And
wow,
at least there was a bar like that. I don't know. I don't go out much. But it used to be.
And you were telling me that now Prague has a nice comic convention.
Yeah, they have PragueCon every year now. So there's a PragueCon coming up, I think, in the next 2 or 3 months. And it was delayed because of COVID. So they had the first one just before COVID hit, and then the second one was delayed. And now I think, and then they had the second one, and then the next one I think is in about 3 months. But it's a very good, very popular thing. I think they said something like 6,000 guests. I mean,
that's great.
It's a big deal.
Sure. Continue.
Well, one of the funny things was a Jedi turned up at my booth, and I sort of shook hands with the Jedi, and but it turned out he was the mayor, the local mayor. Yeah, so he turned up as a Jedi, so he's up for it too. He has a laugh with it.
Isn't that fantastic? I mean, President Obama is a big comic book
Was he
guy.
a big fan?
Grew up on Conan and Spider-Man. Those were his two favorite heroes. And it's like, it really is like, okay, that's awesome. Yeah. And as I was telling you off the air, I had the pleasure of interviewing Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who is absolutely a dyed-in-the-wool nerd and big opinions on the Predator movies and the Alien franchise, and how he's not happy with some of the recent movies. Very funny. And I'm like, I can't believe I'm talking to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar about this.
No, I mean, to me, that's fascinating because, he was, like I said to you earlier, it's just the whole thing with Bruce Lee and the film Airplane, that he was the co-pilot in Airplane. And so I don't know from sports because I don't really pay any attention to sports, but yeah, the Game of Death, that famous
Bruce Lee
film. So, but yeah, I'll need to watch that. I look forward to seeing that actually.
Oh, it's all right. Well, it's audio, but I'll send you the link.
Oh,
Man.
is it? What doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's even better actually, because I can draw. I don't have to
There you
watch
go.
it.
I primarily Word Balloon is audio. I only started doing videos since the start of COVID and everything, and now I do both. And I mean, some creators are still uncomfortable being on camera, and I'm
Yeah.
always like, that's fine. We'll just do an audio. But I like it, and it's great because I've cultivated a separate video audience from the audio audience. So
No, I think it's a good thing to have both, because then you get the option, So it's always a treat. And also, if I'm intending on listening to a podcast and it happens to have video, then that's okay. I just have it at the side when I'm working, and I can glance at it when I want to.
Oh, absolutely, man. No. So another great project you did was the tragedy of Macbeth.
Yeah, that's right.
And
so
was this with David and Aces?
No. What happened here was I was working on a series of drawings based on actor friends of mine. So I focused on 2 or 3 different groups of actors in Prague, and then I happened to really like the Macbeth production by Prague Shakespeare and company, and so I don't know what happened. Oh yeah, they okay. So they were doing it was 2015. I think it was an anniversary of 400 years since the death of Shakespeare, and they were going to put on every single thing he did. It's an incredibly ambitious endeavor, and they were getting actors involved and stuff. And they asked me to get involved, and I don't have time to do that kind of work. So I just said I can't really do that, but I can maybe draw something. I can maybe make some drawings, and so but then I had the idea maybe I could actually document the play. So I drew the play, and I gave myself a tight deadline. I said I'd do an entire graphic novel of 89 pages in 7 days.
When you do
which I failed to do.
Oh, which you failed to do in that time window.
But I made it to 28 days, and that was great because 28 days is a cycle of the moon, and the witches, that's all tied up with witchcraft. So I thought, oh, that's handy. So I did it in 28 days, which is roughly 5 or 6 pages a day. So
wow,
yeah,
man,
yeah, I was a wreck. You should have seen me. I was like, it was just grease, and I looked like one of the witches at the end, just.
Do you now when you adapt something like Macbeth? I immediately think of some of the movie adaptations they've done of the play.
Yeah, I avoided that.
I was going to ask. Okay,
yeah.
And I understand that you want your own vision, obviously.
Yeah. I avoided that. What I decided to do. Okay, so Prague Shakespeare had a really, really dark version of the play, and one of the things they'd done is they'd incorporated a whole bunch of the actors to play the 3 witches. So you had a mass, what looked like smoke in the darkness, and occasionally a face would emerge from this, and then another face, and these were the witches, and it could be any one of these actors. So it was really creepy. So what I decided to do was base it on the memory I had of Scotland, various locations in Scotland. So I grew up not that far from Macbeth country, and I've lived very close to it, in fact, and I've passed through areas, I know areas. So I tried to envisage that and give it a kind of slightly more fantastical look. But one thing I did was there's a place in Scotland called Benahee, and it's at the top of Benahee, it's a mountain. There's just this kind of rubble. And they say it's a vitrified fort, which is to say, at some point in the deep past, they built a castle or a citadel, some kind of citadel, and then they melted the rock together. They had the capacity to heat the rock up to such an extent that the rock melted together. Now, I understand this is this is an archaeological theory, but I've learned recently that it's starting to become considered slightly controversial, but I don't know where that stands. Nonetheless, you go up there, and it's just this weird kind of rocky, almost volcanic black rock. So I decided everything would look a bit like that. So that was a main driving force. And when I finished it, I watched Polanski's, because everyone talks about Polanski's Macbeth being really good. So I waited till the book was done and printed, and that night I watched the Polanski one. I didn't like it. I didn't think it was. I didn't see what was so great about it.
Have you seen?
But Orson Welles did a great one. The black and white Orson Welles.
That's what I was going to ask, man. Yes,
it's fantastic.
And it's and it was done on such a small soundstage and budget. And it's funny when you say how quickly you put Macbeth together, I was
Yeah.
thinking about Wells because he made it in like 2 months or whatever.
Oh, really?
So
I didn't know that.
oh yeah, it's like a 50-day shooting schedule.
Oh my
It was
God. Okay.
insane. And
Cool.
I mean, yeah, and I would say of all the Macbeths I've seen, and I've seen Polanski, it is the Wells one that I'm like, oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the most exciting one I've seen anyway. So yeah, so that was the idea. Sort of envisage it against a sort of in an imagined Scotland. I didn't look at anything. I didn't go on the internet and look for these locations. I just sort of imagined it, and they did it very stark, very black and white, and sheer black and white. And yeah, it was very successful. And then and recently, I can tell you, Clover is going to publish it as in a new format. So
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
coming out. Yeah, so it's coming out in a new format soon.
I grabbed this from Amazon, so I don't know if that's in advance of the Clover version or not.
No, this is my version I used. I printed a sort of homebrew version I made here.
Sure.
I thought if I did it really stark, then I could print it on the cheapest Xerox and it would still look okay. But I didn't realize that Xerox has come a long way since I was a student, and they ended up printing these beautiful books. They're absolutely beautiful. And so I had 100 of these here in Prague, and I couldn't ship them out because it was too expensive to ship to people. So I found out about CreateSpace on Amazon, and I put it through Amazon, and they produced a slightly different format, but in a pulp paper, which was my original intention.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So you get the original intended pulp from Amazon, and it looks like you'd expect. But
is that like a news rag, sort of like old fashioned?
Yeah, it's kind of cheap paper you'd get on maybe like the kind of paper you get on a paperback book. It's not necessarily designed to take ink, but it holds it fine, and it works. It works. But
no, I understand.
But the really surprising thing is the one I printed here was beautiful. It was just Xerox, and it was just lovely. It printed really well, and it bound really well, and it's hefty, and and the inks are really shiny black, and the whites are real pearly whites. So I couldn't believe it. It was the very inverse of what I'd expected, because you hear about all these artists, starting out printing their comic and stapling it together, and
oh yeah,
and it's cheap as chips, but it gets them noticed. That's as far as I can see, that's gone. Now it's
it's not actually. Here in Chicago, we have a zine convention called Cake, and I forget what the letters stand for, but essentially it is both established cartoonists and kids breaking in.
Great.
One of the festivals, and it's always great to see. And no, man, and I know several stores here in Chicago that still will carry zines and homemade comics from people, and it's wonderful. That I'm glad to say the tradition is still going on, and now isn't it really interesting? And as we were talking off the air, and I consider, even as a former broadcaster, this to be as well. Technology is so great that somebody can make something on their own. Yeah. And if they've got the talent, it could be near publisher quality work. And
absolutely,
it can sell it themselves,
Yeah, and it can surpass publishers very easily, because the thing about publishers, not all publishers, but you do see this, things get put together. You hear complaints from creators saying that something wasn't done right, or somebody mishandled something. But if you're making it yourself, then you're going to put that extra thing into it, because if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing right. So you'll sit down and really put the extra into it, and it'll bother you if you don't fix that one little thing. Whereas publishers got a whole different way of looking at the world, maybe.
Oh yeah. Well, they have a different agenda. I mean, they're and I understand the difference between the
not Clover, though. I must say, not Clover, because they've produced a beautiful item. This is the book, and
yes.
It's just
here, yeah. I'll put the cover back up. There we go.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. No, it's amazing, man, and I'm really glad. Hank Canals, formerly of
he's
DC,
great.
He's the guy who kind of alerted me to the project. Now, did Hank edit your book at all, or
no? Hank came on the scene a bit after I was involved with Clover. It was basically, I think what happened was Pat liked Thrawn Janet, so I worked on Defoe, and then Ted Adams saw Defoe and called me or emailed me and so and he read about MK Ultra in 2000 AD. So and he asked, he came out of nowhere like that. So
I didn't
that's how that
realize
happened.
Ted. I wasn't paying attention. So Ted's in charge of Clover.
Well, I don't know what the story is. I guess Ted took a back seat or stepped back or something, but that's where Hank came in, and he's been great. We've just been having a good laugh about a bunch of stuff on the internet and stuff, posting various things about the book. But he's been very supportive, and I couldn't be happier with the item that Robbie and Ted and Hank have brought together.
Absolutely.
So I couldn't be happier. I really I'm a very I have to be very careful about things because I've got a graphic design background, so I'm very, very critical about the way things are printed, and I can spot something very quickly that's off. And there's nothing wrong with this at all. The only thing that's wrong with it is a couple of things I did wrong, but I'll fix those as we go forward. But nobody's noticed them. Well, actually, somebody did notice them. A friend of mine noticed that we spelled Fruit Loops wrong. So Fruit Loops, because Fruit Loops is apparently FROOT, and that's my fault. I didn't know that. And but then he pointed out it's okay. This guy Derek pointed out that it's okay. It's like it reinforces the Mandela effect, because there's people that apparently say that Fruit Loops were originally spelled FRUIT, and that it's something to do with the Mandela effect that they're now spelled FROOT. So I might just keep it. So we'll see.
You had a good story about another one a good backstory about one of your stories, and I guess it was inspired by Inglourious Bastards. And here's the image, and I'll let you tell the story of what this.
It's the opposite, John. I think it's the opposite, because what happened was I hadn't seen it in Inglourious Bastards, and then I did see it a couple of years after it came out, and the opening scene has these Jewish girls under the floorboards of the kitchen of this French guy's house. And I thought, that's odd, because I did that 10 years ago.
Wow.
So so this is Maurice Mule that ran the Prague Post in between 1995 and 97. Wow. And this is the last page of a story in which a little girl is being taken to Auschwitz, but there's a car accident. The transporter gets halted, and there's some confusion, and the little girl escapes with a man into the crowd, and the man hides her under his floorboards.
And then
the Nazis do a door-to-door search, and they come to him and they pace around on the floor, and they have this moment where they discuss the protectorate, and she's under there the whole time, and I thought, that's odd, because that's really, really like that's the same thing, but coincidences happen, right? But then a few years later, a friend of mine said, "Oh, Quentin Tarantino's mother lived here in Prague." I said, "I didn't know that." She said, "Yeah," and she had a subscription to the Prague Post.
Oh, wow!
So I don't care who hears me say this, but that was what I was told. And then I spoke to an artist. I won't name the artist, but he told me she actually is a collector of comic art. So I thought,
Tarantino's mom collects comic book art.
That's what I was told. So I thought, that's interesting. So it's very possible that she saw it and somehow he saw it. But Tarantino's whole career is based on this auteur thing of taking something and flipping it and doing something with it. So if I've been folded into that, I guess that would be a compliment of sorts. So.
Or it could be like I love in Alan Moore's Mindscape movie, he talks about how the steam engine was really kind of developed in different parts of the world at around the same time, that it was in the zeitgeist. And it really is true. Like, you can appreciate that. Well, again, what natural science and mechanics were out there, just kind of a bunch of smart people in different parts of the world, when we really were disjointed and not connected, came up with the same thing, and it was Fulton in America and the guy in Italy,
Yeah, to be honest with you, this was pre-internet, and now with the internet, if I have an idea and it happens, I always go to the internet and look, because I always think that was too easy. So I must have seen that somewhere. So I always try and scope it out. If I do a cover for 2000 AD, I always go to 2000 AD's back issues and check, because I'm like, wait, that's too that came too easy, and I couldn't do it with that one. But I had the same feeling with the little girl. I thought, when I came up with the idea, I thought, have I seen that somewhere? But I hadn't. And as far as I know, it's never been done before, but maybe it has. But I don't know. It looks like I was the first. But I'll tell you something about that zeitgeist thing. There's a theory called the 100th monkey. Have you heard this?
No, tell me.
Okay, so it's been debunked, but it stands as a good allegory for what you're talking about. In that there was some researchers on a Micronesian, oh no, it would be in African islands, and they'd seen these monkeys, and they were eating sweet potatoes, and they observed a monkey drop one of the sweet potatoes into the sea, and then he was eating it, and then he was seen to show other monkeys how to eat the sweet potato, because now it was salty, it was slightly more palatable.
Oh, funny.
You know, presumably. And but then the researchers noticed spontaneously in all the other islands where they were unconnected to these monkeys, other monkeys were spontaneously seen to be dipping their sweet potatoes into the sea salt. And so they came up with this theory called the 100th monkey, which is that for one monkey to do it, nothing happens. 50 monkeys do it, nothing happens. But you get 100 monkeys, that tips over into the sort of collective unconscious. And everybody knows how to do it. And so it explains that how when Einstein came up with his special theory of relativity, you know, people more experienced than himself couldn't figure out what he was talking about. But today, undergraduates grasp it really quickly. So it's like, how is that? Well, it's because it's spilled over into enough people grasped it for it to spill over into the collective unconscious. I don't believe that. That's just a theory, and that's just the idea. And it's been debunked because somebody managed to prove that these monkeys have been sticking potatoes in the water for thousands of years, and it's so, you know.
No, but truly, it is that. With I even like the fact that it is kind of intangible. That again that circumstances just kind of come together, and some people see it, some people don't. And again, when especially as you say, pre-internet, but even further back when, again, everything was happening in various regions, and Robert Fulton had no idea that the guy in Italy was also developing a steam engine.
That's right. And Marconi got the patent for radio for maybe 100 years, until it was shown that Tesla had invented radio because he needed it for something else. He didn't even bother, really making a big patent out of it. It was part of another patent. So
absolutely.
So we grew up, we were at school, we all learned it was Marconi that came up with the radio, but in fact it was Nikola Tesla.
Yeah. No, I hear you, man. Yeah. Or even I know the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell and the Italian Meucci. There's debate on who really did it first and everything. No, it's always fascinating. And again, these new technologies, as they appear, how they change the world and how people find different applications for them. And like I said, man, this is. Word Balloon is a standing example of that. 17 years now, and it's.
I know. Congratulations. That's
thanks, man.
What's your actual anniversary date then?
May 10th.
Okay,
this so we'll May 10th.
Why don't you have some kind of why don't you do something for that? We'll all raise a glass to you.
Oh, God bless you, man. No, it's.
I'll do it.
Honestly, it's not a thank you very much. You're very kind. Unlike having a network that you have to approve whatever numbers or whatever, I mean, it's just showing up, and I do appreciate. I'll certainly probably do something for the 20th. Knock on wood, if we're still going, and I have every.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, do that.
But yeah, it's like 17. It's like all right, whatever. And I mean, when various millionth downloads happen. Like I just had like my 11 millionth download.
Wow.
Starting. Yeah. And it's like, believe me, it's me. And then of course I always get friends who are like, if you charged a dime for every one of those downloads, I'm like, yeah, I know. It's like, I'm making a little bit of money now. All right. I'm like, it's okay.
Don't upset me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and also we were talking about it earlier, the expectation of free. Yeah. And that's a big barrier. And I really think the younger generations, with so much free content online and stuff, it is, well, why would I have to pay for it? I didn't have to pay for X, Y, and Z. And not realizing that, well, YouTube is footing the bill, or Spotify, or those are examples that come right away and everything.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it is interesting how everything is changing and the way we consume things, and the expectation again of paying for something or not paying for something.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of that. I mean, it's one thing with the internet, but yeah. And you're supporting yourself with advertising revenue and stuff. That all
Yes.
makes sense. But I saw a meme yesterday, and it was the fact that Spotify was pulling out of Russia, and it has harmed the Russian economy by $1.50.
Well, I wonder, especially with cryptocurrency, honestly, I mean, this is such an insane international situation. It is everyone's fear of consequences that keep the other countries from really stopping Putin in a much more physical way. And because of that, Putin can go that much further and do that much more damage with seeming impunity. And that's really sad. And I worry too that even what few levers of economic sanctions that the international community can put on Russia, I just have a feeling that Putin kind of is like five moves ahead of all of us and is already.
I think he'd like you to. I think he'd like you to think that. I think until very recently, like 12 days ago, people were thinking that, but now it's like, no, that was dumb, and I think he's going to run out of money.
I certainly hope so. I really do. And I mean, and truly, the resolve of the Ukrainians are amazing. Now, how far is Prague?
We're about 873, 874 miles. As you can see, I've looked it up. But we're about that far away from Kiev, I think. I think that's right.
Yeah.
So about from California, in case of California, something like that, it would be like LA to Denver.
Okay. Yeah. So
pretty close, really. And
yeah.
I mean, and I didn't think I knew anybody there, but a friend of mine was there, and he just left with his family. He was in Odessa, so everybody, is appalled by this. So I think that's going to have an effect. The big worry now, though, is the nuclear plants. I don't want to digress into any of this nonsense.
No, I hear you, man. And I mean, believe me, we're all living with this news and information every day, and one of the reasons why I do Word Balloon is kind of to, let people think about something fun rather than. But again, you can't help it, and I was curious also, as you say, being in Central Europe, how close you were to the sad action and everything.
Pretty close. I mean, you see it. I was walking up the street last week, and there was a whole big commotion of people, and they were loading vans, and it was a drive to get stuff for all these refugees. And they were driving it to Ukraine. So people were putting their lives on the line just driving there, because as soon as they cross that border, they're a potential target.
Absolutely, man. No, good Lord. Again, the images that we're getting and the footage we're getting just shows you the nightmare that the Ukrainians are living through. And I'm a big boxing fan and follower, and used to even report on boxing for about 16 years professionally. And there's a lot of great fighters that come from.
There's
Ukraine.
Like 5 now.
5 current active ones, yes, and of course the Klitschko brothers, the former heavyweight champions, and Vitaly is the mayor of Kiev. He's been the mayor since 2014, and he was just on our Sunday morning political news talk shows, making the rounds and everything. And I mean, brilliant man. I mean, and that's the great thing. I mean, I've always had respect for both Klitschkos, because I mean they were amazing physical fighters, but both have PhDs and are really, really smart guys.
They are. And the thing that I saw that really was quite moving was one of the Russian commanders that was became a POW. He gave a speech. You can see it on the internet. And they shouldn't really be parading POWs in front of the cameras. That's probably not. Again, that's probably against the Geneva Convention or something, but they kind of have to here, because on the other side of that border, people are being lied to. This is a massive fake news operation in part of Russia. So these Russian guys that have been captured, the guy says, "Look, I'm not saying this because I've been told to say it. This is wrong, and we were given a bunch of lies." And I only realized, this is what he says. This will interest you as a boxing correspondent.
Yeah, please.
he only realized that he'd been lied to when he saw the Klitschko brothers and other boxers. In fact, it was three other boxers whose names I can't remember, who he was a big fan of, had joined the fight against Russia. And when he realized that, he knew that he'd been lied to, because he knew he'd been following these guys all their career, so he had a good sense of where their moral compass was. So he was like, "This isn't Nazis," you know.
Absolutely good. Yes, and it isn't that insane that
Yeah,
Putin has the gall to call the Ukrainians Nazis and stuff. No, and I can name a couple of
madness.
those boxers.
Yeah.
Vasily Lomachenko is the lightweight champion, and Alexander Usyk is one of the current belt
Usyk.
holders of the heavyweight title. And yeah, man, no, these men are men of integrity, and truly could have and were in some cases not in the country when the invasion started, and they went
Yeah.
back.
They
And
flew
they
back.
and
Yeah.
you know
Oh, they're
that's
very
amazing.
brave, incredibly
Yes,
brave. The
yes,
courage. It's really even once the war ends, this is going to be a sort of beacon for everybody. Like, look at that. Look at the courage of these people.
100%.
Incredible, and the ferocity with which they're fighting. Brilliant.
No, I hear you, man. Well, again, I'll pull it back to the book we started the conversation to talk about again, and it's really this fascinating look at some deviant tactics that were done by the CIA back in the day, and it's a fascinating subject, and it's so incredibly drawn. What you
You.
put together, man, absolutely.
Thank
MK
you.
Ultra, Sex, Drugs, and the CIA. It's from Clover Press. Volume 1 is out now. Volume 2 is coming out, as you say, in the summer, and it
Yeah, I
gives us
think
an
so.
excuse to reconvene and
Yeah,
talk
that's
more
great.
about this and other books. Stuart, seriously, it's a pleasure to meet you, and I really appreciate where the conversation went today. And
That's
it
great.
makes me want to talk
Thank
to you
you.
more, man. So please
Thanks
come
for
back.
having me on, John. It's great.
Absolutely. And you're still figuring out your convention plans as far as how to promote this, correct?
Yeah, I would go to the States and I'd go to San Diego or whatever, but I haven't made any plans yet. But and I don't know I think a lot of these things are kind of up in the air still with COVID,
Certainly.
so I don't know. But I was going to say to you, one of the things that's a major point in this story is that not only were all these nefarious things being done, but the plan was to sort of develop a kind of mind control. There was a whole bunch of sub projects. One was a Manchurian candidate, that would be an assassin you could switch on and switch off. Switch their personalities. These experiments actually took place. They had a couple of candidates that actually worked. They'd call them up, say a word, and their personality would change. That happened. That worked on 2 occasions with 2 different candidates. But so this was all about various aspects of mind control. But what's very interesting, and it's a thread through the book, is that as well as people like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, who was tested, there were other people who were creative-minded people like Ken Kesey and Jerry Garcia and a bunch of others who tasted this LSD. And I'm not advocating drugs, by the way. I've never even taken LSD, but I haven't. But I don't need to. But anyway, they left this thing and started to try and synthesize their own LSD so that they could use it for creative purposes,
Yes.
mind expansion. So the very opposite thing seems to have happened, where the attempt at mind control has kicked off, because they bought up. This is the thing: the CIA bought up the entire global supply of LSD. They bought it all up from Sandoz in Switzerland, and then they tested it on people, and then those people synthesized it, and it proliferated, and suddenly you've got a mind expansion program called the 1960s. You've got this entire explosive era,
The culture.
possibly kicked off because of a screwed up CIA operation.
Well, there's a comic book story tied to that, and I'm glad you brought that insight up, because John Ostrander, who co-created the Suicide Squad, he had a great series by DC in the 80s, a horror series. It was called Wasteland.
Mm-hmm.
And his collaborator for that was this great comedy writer and comedy theater genius named Del Close. And Del really helped develop improvisational comedy here in Chicago, and a lot of great American comedians came through.
Yeah. Second City, is that what it is?
You got it, Second City.
Yeah,
absolutely,
very famous.
Absolutely, and literally comedians from people like Mike Nichols and Elaine May from the 50s, all the way up to Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn in the 90s, all
Stephen
studied
Colbert,
under
maybe
Del.
even.
And
Wow.
Del is in the Untouchables,
Uh-huh.
and he is the mob accountant, and also he's in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and he's a teacher, and just has a
Oh,
very quick scene in
is it
Ferris.
one that just keeps saying Bueller?
No,
Bueller?
that's Ben Stein,
Oh,
who's
is
a
it?
very
Okay.
famous guy. But he's a different teacher. He's got those great kind of old fashioned glasses, and
Uh-huh.
he's the way he speaks. He's like, in what way does, and I forget what literary point he was making in the movie, but Del and John wrote Wasteland, and John was telling me that Del signed up for an LSD experiment
No kidding.
in the 50s or 60s,
Oof.
and they gave him a tab, and he was put in a sensory deprivation tank
Yeah.
and under observation. And of course, he's like, now he's one with the universe, and I'm sure he's astral projecting all over the place. And apparently, at about midway through the experiment, he said the door to the tank opened up, and this bright light, and he couldn't see anything except for the light. So it was almost like if God suddenly descended, and he heard this echoey voice go, "What do you want for lunch? Lunch." And he goes, "Can I have a tuna fish sandwich?" And he said, "Sure. And he goes, so yeah, Del certainly, and Del had an incredible imagination, and Wasteland is one of those forgotten DC series that so many different writers and artists contributed to it. I think to republish it, I know Levitz was gun shy doing it because he didn't know he wanted the writers and artists to be compensated for it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if
many.
it's collected or not, or I don't even know if it's available. Oh, I do know Comixology and DC Universe did have it digitally, and it may still be available that way. But yeah, it's this amazing series of horror stories.
Oh, I'd love to see that. And I'd like to know more about that story that you just told. If that's only his story, I mean, if he's drawn it in a comic, then I wouldn't want to use it. But if that's just an anecdote or something that no one's ever drawn, I'd try to find a way to put that in.
That's well, again, that was John's story, and John told it here
so
on the show.
It's oddly similar to when I was doing something the other day as part of the frontispiece of the book. It's not really part of the story. It's just a kind of series of images that show you glimpses in panels of what they were up to.
That. Yes.
Yeah, and one of the things I keep repeating is a guy who's all wired up, and they're doing this experiment which was called remote viewing, where they were trying to see into the Kremlin, what's going on in the Kremlin, and they use these people and try and get them to use their psychic powers. So I've got a guy lying there with these cables, and you keep coming back to him, and he keeps having these observations, and some of them are completely irrelevant. Most of them are irrelevant, but one of them is actually very relevant, but no one recognizes the importance of it, because that's the other thing about information. You get the information, you can get all this information, even if your psychic thing was working, how would you know how to use it unless you knew what it referred to? So you'd need a broader thing. So anyway, I've got him looking and seeing something, and then at one point they say, what do you see in the Kremlin? And he concentrates, and you see a bowl of borscht, and he just says borscht, So, but
that inspires a final question regarding the book. And I hope this doesn't spoil, because I think it's more allegorical than really being part of the narrative of the main story. But you refer to this moment on the Ed Sullivan Show, and a poem, and the way you drew it is incredibly imaginative and stark and everything. Was this like a beat poem that was performed on Ed Sullivan? Because
yeah, so I think I'm trying to remember if the script had Ed Sullivan or not, but I happened to come across. Yeah, I don't know if the script had Ed Sullivan, but I happened to come across the fact that you can see it. I'll send you a link. That on Ed Sullivan, who we associate with Elvis and all these other things.
Yeah,
he had a couple of things going. He'd have these variety acts and stuff. And one night, right in the middle of his variety setup, which is just the guy spinning plates or
all the crazy like vaudevillian
crazy vaudevillian fun stuff. He said there's a couple of artists and writers in England have made an animation, and I think it's important that we all see it tonight. And he broadcast this animation, and it was about the atom bomb. and it is absolutely horrific. So all these people all over America saw this horrific animation where the guy's eyes roll, they melt in his sockets and run down his face, and it's incredible. And it was a message for anti-war message. And
Sure.
so, but that scene that I drew there, that sort of ends the story. I don't think that's a spoiler because we're really only halfway through at this point.
Right.
It's volume 1 and 2, and that room. The reason I went to such intricate importance to draw the room the way I did is we see that room again. And there's actually a lot of things get repeated. There's a lot of panels that you start to see have been repeated. And I'm kind of working on the idea of flashbacks because, people who have serious or bad LSD experiences talk about getting these like flashbacks and images, tracers and stuff like that. So I try and incorporate these things in there. But this room is very specific to something that happens later. So you'll see that. And you might understand that this is sort of a foreshadowing. So there's an element of, I think the Germans call it Gestalt, which is when you're focusing on something, you'll know this, but you'll suddenly see something like a cup breaks. And then the next scene, it's almost like a foreshadowing. It's like an image omen, So that. Yeah, and the animation really happened. So you can actually look that up. And it had an effect because page 1 of volume 2 begins with, you see one of those American, we don't have them anywhere else in the world, just in America, you have these newspaper boxes. You just open the box and you can take, everybody just takes one newspaper, but you can take about 5 if you wanted, but
Sure.
everybody just seems to take one. So I have one of those in the foreground, and in the actual basin of this thing, you can see the front page, and it's the shock and horror of the thing you saw on the last page. The Americans are in uproar about having been forced to watch this thing on the Ed Sullivan Show the night before.
Wow.
So it had a big psychic effect. People were kind of freaked out by this.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, it makes sense, and that's why I wasn't sure what I was looking at. And God, I would love to see that animation. That's amazing and
I'll send it to you tonight, John. Yeah.
Oh yeah, please do, man. Because that sounds really incredible. Well, again, these are some of the anecdotes that Stewart and Company have collected in MK Ultra. Once again, MK Ultra: Sex, Drugs, and the CIA from Clover Press. Volume 1 out now. Volume 2 coming out in the summer, and we will follow up and talk about Volume 2 next time.
Magic. Looking forward to it.
Stuart, truly, pleasure meeting you. Thank you so much. Great conversation.
And,
and continued success on whatever else you're working on, and we'll talk more about it next time.
Thank you, John. It was a delight, and thank you very much for having us on. That's just great. Great fun talking to you.
My pleasure, man. I'm going to be on in a few hours, everybody. Also talking to a great Canadian artist, Ramon Perez, and celebrating an anniversary, and also talking about Raid Studios' new anthology collection of various stories. So that's going to happen at 9 Eastern here on Word Balloon. So join me in a few hours. That's about 5 hours away. Until then, everybody, thanks for watching.